And welcome to day one at the Dell TINL studio here at Mobile World Congress 2016. We're kicking off programming with Drew Schulke. He's Executive Director of Next Generation Infrastructure at Dell. He'll discuss what insights and trends will be covered at this year's biggest mobile event. This will also be a good opportunity to see why connecting what matters is at the core of Dell's networking division. And Drew, welcome to the program.
Abe, great to be here.
Great to have you. I want to start by asking you what your feeling, your perspective is in Dell's place here at the biggest mobile event on the planet.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, it just kicked off. The show just opened. You can the marquee event for this space, hands down. From an annual perspective, we always look forward to this. We bring a lot of our assets here, a lot of our team here to support this. What it means to us, to the whole point of connect what matters is if you think about everything that's going on around mobility, from what's happening all the way out the edge with devices, all the way back into what's happening in the central office. We want to be the platform on which all of that work happens. And so if you look at the breadth of the assets we brought here today, I think you'll see from all the way over our edge devices and mobility products, all the way to some of the hyperscale data center points that we have with our ESI group. We've got that entire spectrum covered, and want to be the infrastructure partner of choice in all of that.
Now we see Converged infrastructure group all the time, really taking the workload off the customer, the service provider, the enterprise entity. What does that really mean? Can you illustrate or give us a sort of a use case of what that means?
Yeah, well, what happened with Convergence is, when the mainframe technology was disaggregated and client server came on the scheme, we had these distinct technical domains around compute, networking, and storage appear, and that drove a great degree of specialization and feature enrichment. But at the end of the day, you still have to stitch that all together. And for the better part of a couple decades, it was up to the end customer to do that stitching together. Convergence came on the scene initially in its most simplest form, and the easiest way to think about it is an idea of a reference architecture, which says, here is a known good set of ingredients in the ratios that you need them to be, along with a very prescriptive way for which we're going to connect these things together and manage them throughout the life cycle. And we, as an infrastructure provider with expertise in all those areas, put forth our recommendation for that as a starting point and a foundation on which that work can go do. And that then takes the burden off the customer in terms of having to guess and go through an expensive trial and error process by which those things come together, and being able to start with a known good foundation that we've invested a lot of time with technically to spec out, but also the time to validate and get significant cycles from a life cycle perspective under our belt so we can guide them through that process.
Drew, one thing you notice at Mobile World Congress each and every year is the value people put on partnerships. You can see it right here in the Dell booth. It's all about partnering up. I want to talk about the collaboration between the Extreme Scale Infrastructure Group and also the Rack Scale, Intel's Rack Scale Group as well. Yep. Can you again illustrate an example of what that is?
Yeah, so what you'll see here today, if you stop by the booth, we're announcing a new product here from our ESI organization that is fully compliant with Intel's RSA, or Rack Scale Architecture approach. And the easiest way to think about that is think of it as a cloud API. So as we go through this process of virtualizing the network, but then also just virtualization from an enterprise perspective, you're going to have several different clouds that could potentially sit on top of that. And the idea for RSA is that there's a consistent API that translates between whatever that cloud is and the infrastructures down below. And why that's important is because that infrastructure down below is going to evolve significantly over the coming years, whereas today it looks like the traditional ingredients of storage, networking, and compute that we talked about it, but that over the next decade will become even more disaggregated down to almost a component level where you have pools of resources at a level of granularity that we've not contemplated today. And that's why that role of that cloud API is very important, and why we work so closely with companies like Intel on that RSA effort, because that's the way that we continue to put ourselves forth as that infrastructure platform provider of choice as this industry continues to evolve.
Let's talk more about some of these partnerships right here in the Dell booth. You have a couple of demonstrations, more than a couple of demonstrations going on, one between Metaswitch and Red Hat, and the other one with Affirmed. Can you talk about one of those two?
Yeah, well, what I love about this event is, because the partner ecosystem is so prevalent here, is we like to show a lot of our best work, not so much in our booth, but actually in our partners' booths. And it's a wonderful opportunity. And so the two you mentioned are great ones to talk about. Encourage everybody to swing by both of these. Over in the VMware booth, actually, we have a demonstration running and it's running out of our lab in California, but showing an IMS solution from Affirmed running on VMware on Dell hardware. And that's a solution that our teams have worked together closely with over the past couple of months to put together. A great example of partnership on that front. And then as well in the Intel booth, a different solution where you've got us working with Red Hat and Metaswitch for another demo. So 2 great opportunities. There's several more going on as well, but those are 2 good ones to talk about. And I think it shows as well sort of the importance of partners for us in the ecosystem here. It also, I think, speaks to the testament of our openness and willing to work with a number of different partners, because we see, we want to be the vendor of choice and the platform on which you can feel comfortable that you're going to have a lot of choice. And those are 2 great examples to contrast, how far we're willing to go to support that.
Drew, last year and the year before that even, we talked about the Internet of Things. Between last year and this year, we're now talking about edge computing, compute at the edge, the importance of that. And then maybe just a few months back, or I would even go back even further than that, 6 to 8 months back, we started talking about fog computing.
Yeah.
Can you sort of walk us through that?
Yeah, I personally, this is, every 10 years or so, a trend comes along that really gets me just super excited, is because you can see it coming, you can see the value is really clear. Things are moving to the edge, and there's a lot of time talking about mobile core here today, and that's super important in terms of what we're doing to virtualize the network. But as 5G becomes more prevalent, and even before 5G becomes prevalent, this need to have more capacity at the edge, more services at the edge for the service providers is incredibly important. At the same time that we're talking about that, we have this wave of IoT coming our way, which again lends itself to have this need for compute capacity and services at the edge. And so this idea of these big central, massive data centers that are going to do all this work, over the next decade or so, that's going to become slightly disrupted, as the need to have services at the edge and services centralized are almost equally important. And to me, this is one of those areas that, from a Dell perspective, we're again super excited about, because we see a convergence in the opportunity around virtualizing the network, and a convergence in the opportunity around IoT. And at the end of the day, it's about more platforms at the edge and working with partners to put solutions that are scalable and sustainable at the edge.
Drew, I want to just kind of finish talking about back to the Mobile World Congress event and your experiences in the past. You can look anywhere here on the floor, you're going to see 2 things, NFV and IoT. So you're coming into the show knowing you're going to see that. But in your experience and being here a few times, do you ever walk away with anything that you were surprised about, and do you expect that this time again?
Oh boy, am I ever surprised by anything? Well, I mean, I think particularly this year, to the point we talked about earlier from an IoT perspective, and starting to have more of the discussion about things going on at the edge, I expect to see a lot more that's going on there as well. I mean, especially the whole movement to prepare for 5G is going to drive a lot of that conversation. And so we'll have to see how I'm surprised this year, but there's always something.
So what's the, I don't know, you may not be able to go too much into detail about this, but sort of where in the timeline is Dell as far as the 5G discussion?
Well, I think we're at the same point where almost everybody else is, which are we're working with the industry groups, working with folks like TIA to get our inputs into what we think the industry needs to be going to have it be a sustainable and successful effort, right? So that's where our relationship with TIA has been incredibly helpful. And the other thing that we're doing is working with a lot of the carriers, working with some of the technology providers. We're going to start to see announcements coming up this week, I think, as well, where some of them are going to start to pilot 5G in certain cities, and we're going to be working with them for that. And I know that's a long transition. 5G isn't going to happen overnight, right? I mean, think about how long it took us to go from circuits to packets, right? I mean, so we're prepared for this from a long haul perspective, but from a Dell perspective, we've got the right relationships with the industry groups. We've got the right relationships with our technology partners, and we're going to work closely with them so as that transition comes into play and we actually start moving into production, we'll be ready to support it.
Drew, it was great talking to you. Have a great show. TI now and TIA appreciates Dell support for our studio right here and the Dell booth on the show floor, so thanks.
Thank you, Abe.
Thank you, Drew. Right. And for our continued coverage from the event floor at Mobile World Congress 2016, please go to tianow.org and follow us on Twitter at TIA_now. So long.